In 1963, the biggest TV show of the year was about to be dragged into the swinging 60s. The Beatles' music had taken the country by storm, and now they took the stage in front of over 20 million people on the Royal Variety Show. Both the producers of the show and the press were concerned that the new group could be a loose cannon in front of royalty.
John, in this Royal Variety Show, when you're appearing before royalty, your language has got to be pretty good, obviously. This thing will change your act just for the Lord Privy Seal.
Oh, no, like, we'll keep, like, the same kind of thing, like, won't we?
Oh, yes,
yeah, that's right.
The Beatles' performance began without a hitch, but unbeknownst to the organisers, John Lennon had some of his own words planned to introduce their final song.
They had a seating order. The more you paid, the nearer you got to the stage. And he said, we're going to do, I think it was Twist and Shout.
For our last number, I'd like to ask your help. With the people in the cheaper seats, clap your hands. And the rest of you, if you just rattle your jewellery.
John was actually planning to say, rattle your fucking jewellery.
The pop rebels of the 1960s had cast the first stone in what would be a turbulent decade.
John Lennon had a party trick. If you nodded off and that, he would stick speed in your drink. And you'd charge around like a clockwork mouse for 4 days and wonder what the hell was up with you. He thought that was hysterical.
The spirit of the swinging 60s was about to revolutionise the world of television. Mop-top scousers like Jimmy Tarbuck were now given television's #1 rated programme to present.
My dad ran in and he said, Jimmy's the new compere. And my mum, she's very close to me, she said, Jimmy who?
I've never seen a young star rise to fame so quick.
In a decade of relentless change, a new showbiz set was about to be ushered in. Some would become household names for years to come. Others would rise and fall again almost overnight.
He was on our TV screens every Saturday, and then suddenly he wasn't.
You know, I went so quickly, my feet hardly touched the ground.
By the late 50s, ITV had created a nation of telly-addicts, but now it would be the BBC, dear old auntie, who would lead the television revolution of the 60s.
Bloody blasphemous gas!
The BBC were dragging us up by the bootstraps.
You dirty old man!
Suddenly people started identifying with the BBC again. We were us.
In the first 5 years of competition, the BBC had floundered against ITV's all-conquering variety shows. And with Jimmy Tarbuck as the trendy young frontman of Sunday Night at the London Palladium, ITV confidently strode into the new decade.
Tarby has treated himself this week. Got the new whistle, the tie, the mod look. I bought a new television set, especially for watching BBC 3. Has a chain on the side for flushing after the programme's over.
This is BBC Television.
Over at the BBC, preparations for an altogether different approach to TV entertainment were being made. A 50-year-old former army interrogator, Hugh Carlton Green, was to be the catalyst for change.
The BBC seemed to have lost touch with a changing society in the early and mid-1950s, and that its programmes had got rather stuffy.
1962, and the first sign of things to come. The BBC's That Was the Week That Was a remorseless broadside against the rulers of the day.
I
say, Henry. Yeah? What do you give these homosexual Johnnies?
Oh, I don't know. Half a crown and an apple, generally.
That kind of stuff hadn't been on TV before because it wasn't allowed to be on TV before. The big difference was that someone like Sir Hugh Carlton Green at the BBC gave the green light for satire to go on television, and that was the revolution.
You put your whole self in, your whole self out, your whole self in, and you shake it all about. You do the whole thing.
We were told, all politicians, that everything they did was self-sacrifice, that everything they did was public service and so on. Now, that's rubbish. I mean, in fact, politicians are just the same as everybody else. They do things for personal ambition and all of those things, and they have to be watched closer than anybody else because they've got more power to affect other people's lives and so on. But so is, and this idea that they were our elders and our betters, that was the idea we had to attack.
June the 13th, Christine Keeler becomes Conservative Party Chief Whip.
Now it's such a convention, the idea that someone is impersonating the Prime Minister. But in those days, it didn't happen. So what happened on television was Willie Rushton played Macmillan.
It's Harold here. Harold Macmillan. M-A-C-R.
It just really grabbed people. They couldn't believe this disrespect, this irreverence, this sniping at politicians in quite that, you know, that way. There'd never been a television series that did this.
That was the week that was catapulted the BBC into the headlines, and the ratings soared.
Midnight Saturday. I leap to comment on the astonishing breakthrough on BBC television. That was the week. Let us have more. Margaret Tucker, Addington Green.
If you look back at the papers of that time, there would be this scoreboard for people who called up. 374 for, 285 against. Obviously, people who loved it thought, we better call up and say we love it, or otherwise we may lose it.
It did something to change the atmosphere in the BBC. It did something to change the public view of the BBC.
For some years, it was very much ITV was us, you know, and the BBC became them, in a way. And in fact, that was what was extraordinary when That Was the Week That Was came along in 1962, that suddenly people started identifying with the BBC again. We were us, and the establishment was them.
Saturday night, eh? I know you, but you don't know me, eh?
The BBC, for so long the worthy mouthpiece of the establishment, suddenly found itself under attack from television's first ever protest group.
David Frost, I am empowered to serve this writ upon you.
The moment it was announced that we were going to do 3 programmes a week instead of 1, a little school mistress in Bromsgrove announced that she was going to give up her job and monitor these appalling things that the BBC was going to put out 3 nights a week. I was asked by the Daily Mail what I thought about this and said, well, I can't think what job she's giving up in order to watch television at 11 o'clock at night on Fridays, Saturdays and Sundays. And the plain implication was that had she been treading the streets, mercifully she didn't sue me because I wouldn't have had anything with which to recompense her, but she did sue the Daily Mail who printed it. And she was Mary Whitehouse, and the Daily Mail had to pay her £5,000, and that was the initial financing of the National Viewers and Listeners Association. So I'm almost, as it were, responsible for poor old Mary.
Let us remember that freedom dies when moral anarchy takes over, and that it lives when citizens accept limitations upon themselves for the greater good of the community as a whole. That is our message. Let us get it out.
Over the coming decade, Mary Whitehouse and the National Viewers and Listeners Association would rise to prominence, relentlessly attacking the 60s spirit and the BBC's role within it. But it proved to be water off a duck's back to the man who was behind the revolution.
Mary Whitehouse said that in my time she'd been not only persona non grata, but persona non-existent. Exactly.
With a new confidence abroad, the BBC was about to change the face of British television. It would court controversy and attract fierce opposition as it sought to keep pace with the provocative spirit of the age. In 1964, Britain went to the polls in one of the closest general elections in modern British history. Each party was looking to gain any significant boost, but the critical factor would come from an unusual source. A television entertainment programme about two rag and bone men was about to play a part in bringing the Labour Party to power.
Harold Wilson objected to the fact that Steptoe was going on at 8:30 in the evening because the polls closed on election day, on the Thursday, because the polls closed at 9 o'clock, and he maintained that the majority of the Labour Party's supporters vote, you know, after they finish work, and he'd lose a lot of votes, and he asked the BBC to move it.
Over 20 million people were addicted to a new television programme about the depressing world of Albert Steptoe and his son, Harold. It was a form of television entertainment that had never been seen before.
You dirty old man!
They were dramas, you know, the Steptoe half hours, they were dramas. There was a terrible tragedy at the heart of Steptoe, which was this, these two people who were fundamentally totally connected to each other but unhappy in that situation, who couldn't get out.
That's one thing I will not tolerate, gambling. It's a sin, and the wages of sin is death. Oh, God, get the tambourines. Will you come to the mission? Will you come? A cup of tea and the bar. Hallelujah.
A world away from television's happy-clappy light entertainment, the BBC's first hit sitcom was a decidedly black comedy.
I always remember one episode of Steptoe where Albert tells Harold that his mother was a slag, and Harold is destroyed by it.
She was the best look around here. I remember when she used to take me shopping down the high street, how proud I was. Oh, the men used to turn around and look at her.
They did more than look at her.
You keep your dirty mouth shut! You've got one like a sewer! You're obscene, you are obscene!
The audience was chilled, because the first time the idea that somebody's mother being a slag could be the stuff of comedy.
And I will not stand by and hear you talk to him like that. After all, he is your father.
That's never been proved neither.
Steptoe and Son's groundbreaking social realism cast the mould for the future of British sitcom and the nation's love affair with failures.
The British don't like to watch a show about life's winners. On the whole, the British would rather watch TV and be reassured that most people are doing worse than they are. It makes them feel good.
Stepson would be the first BBC show to get to #1 in the television ratings. But on election day evening, after pressure from the opposition leader, the BBC Director General made one of the most important scheduling decisions in British history. He postponed the most popular show in the country.
I rang up Harold Wilson and told him about this decision, and he said to me that he was very grateful. It might make a difference of about 20 seats to him. He won, I think, by 4, and I've sometimes wondered what effect my decision had on British political history.
I have just come from the palace where Her Majesty invited me to form an administration.
It's like tail wagging the dog then when you get a television programme determining how many people will go to the polling booth. Amazing times.
With Wilson's election victory, a fresh mood swept through politics and the show business world. The new Labour Prime Minister set a radical new precedent by taking tea with the now influential Showbiz Set.
Harold Wilson behaved very like Tony Blair when he came into office. He thought that he would be touched and bolstered by the glamour of associating with Kenny Lynch and, you know, those sort of important entertainers.
I was coming out with Max Bygraves, and there's always a policeman on the door. And I came out, and do you remember Chamberlain when he came out with the white piece of paper? Well, I came out with the white, and I said, I have this letter here from Herr Hitler. And all the world's press opposite, and this policeman on duty just went, piss off. And I went, oh, yeah, sorry about that.
Thank you very much for giving us this Silver Heart, but I still think you should have given one to good old Mr. Wilson.
Politicians hope that some of the glamour will rub off on them. You know, we have to remember that politics is the show business for the ugly.
Look, in the old days, mate, when them coons come over here...
That's nice, isn't it?
They was give...
Capturing the spirit of the age, the BBC was now courageously moving forward to unleash their second smash hit.
They come over here, don't they? They come over here and tell us what to do. And your darling Harold, he sits there and takes it. God, blimey.
Alf Garnett would captivate the nation as he railed against the new Labour government, race, religion and everything the 60s had to offer.
Get back to your own country, I told them. Get back to the jungle, get your blooming drums out.
And suddenly this thing burst through, and there were these outrageous people saying the most devastating things that people had heard in years about politicians, my God. I mean, slagging off politicians, the church, sex.
Alf resenting, I mean, the music, the mores, the drugs, the idea that Jack's as good as his master. Jack is not as good as his master.
Till Death Us Do Part tested the sensibilities of the television audience as never before and provoked controversy on all fronts.
You said he was born in Manchester, so well, he ain't a proper blackie then, is he? I mean, the ones I'm talking about, they're your proper blacks, aren't they? The ones that was born in the jungle, your natives. I mean, don't tell me they're educated. Half of them are still eating each other.
People occasionally come up to me and say, I love that show of yours, Alf, when you have a go at the coons. And I say, actually, we're having a go at dickheads like you. What? What do you mean? They didn't know what I was talking about.
To this day, Alf Garnett in Till Death Do Us Part presents the biggest single moral problem that TV has ever faced us with. You have to ask yourself, did the audience enjoy his bigotry or see through it? And I got a terrible feeling the answer is both. I think that they understood he was supposed to be a bigot. Some of them secretly agreed with what he was saying, and some people may even have got enjoyment on both levels.
There was a third of people in Britain who agreed with him at that time. A third of people in Britain were totally appalled by it, and a third of people in Britain went, yeah, well, I know, but it's pretty funny, isn't it?
How would you like it if I called you a yid? What are you talking about, yid? I ain't a yid! You're Jewish, aren't you? I ain't not Jewish! You are!
Nobody was left unoffended in the half hour. I mean, if you weren't offended at some stage during that half hour, we weren't actually doing it right, you know what I mean?
Last Thursday evening, we sat as a family and we saw a programme that started at 6:35. And it was the dirtiest programme that I have seen for a very long time.
As Till Death Us Do Part gained bigger and bigger audiences, Middle England organised its troops and marched on Parliament. The woman who had risen to prominence denouncing the BBC's political satire now took up the challenge of getting Alf Garnett pulled off the air. Petitions were delivered to Parliament, but it wasn't the alleged racism they objected to.
What I remember very vividly is one of our neighbours coming round to us, and she'd watched Till Death Us Do Part, and she'd taken note of the various number of bloodies. And I think there was something, oh, don't ask me now, but a colossal number.
Yeah, I mean, Alf was limited to such 16 bloodies and 1 bleating per show. And I never said the F word, and I never said shit, I never said sod. Oh, I might have said sod. But, I mean, it was all very rationed.
You bloody blasphemous scout! Get you off!
Kidding you. People like you don't have to get up my wig.
The programme quickly became a national controversy, and an on-air discussion was broadcast dedicating to debating the rights and wrongs of Alf Garnett.
In Till Death Us Do Part this week, the bee in Mr. Garnett's bonnet was about blood transfusions and heart transplants. And afterwards, hundreds of people rang the BBC, outraged at scenes like these.
I was absolutely sickened by the programme Till Death Do Us Part on Friday night.
Press your buttons and hold them, please.
The BBC's Director General, however, remained unbowed by the increasingly vocal opposition.
45% approve of that.
Carlton Green was the ideal man for the job. He was not afraid of controversy. There were screams of protest from so many. And he used to ring up and say, another phone call from Mary Whitehouse this morning. Good, good. Another 500,000 viewers.
I refused to see her, and I think that was right. It would have only given her publicity. We would not see her even confidentially, because she could not prove that she represented any considerable body of opinion.
Mrs. Mary Whitehouse! Mrs. Mary Whitehouse!
With a new courageous attitude, the BBC even started to ridicule their sworn enemy.
That woman is concerned for the moral welfare of your country, isn't she? The moral fibre is being rotted away by a corrupt television.
Until Carlton Green left the BBC, Mrs. Whitehouse would never be invited in. Almost inevitably, she always blamed him personally for the moral decline of Britain.
The BBC launched us into the permissive society, and that in itself is a terrible indictment of what was supposed to be public service broadcasting.
The BBC may have embraced the rebel cause, but its attempts to handle pop culture would prove a much more hit-and-miss affair.
Swinging Carnaby Street, the trendiest fun fashion centre in the world. This is the place where it all happened.
To rest my eyes in shades of...
By 1967, Britain had become the cultural capital of the world. Carnaby Street, its most iconic image. Pop idols and TV stars socialising together symbolised the swinging scene.
I think Britain was secretly proud of London's reputation as Sin City. In fact, not much of this got through to the television screen, if you look back on it. We just think it did. The TV was still pretty straight-laced.
Poor Auntie Nellie's gone mad on the telly. The doctor will have to be...
Television's first forays into the increasingly powerful world of pop were led by 24-year-old Cilla Black.
I was hungry to try the whole spectrum of show business. It was not a risk at all to me, because I thought, well, if this doesn't work, I can still go and make records. I can still do theatre.
Step inside, love.
But the first sign that Cilla Black was to establish herself as the nation's Saturday night family favourite for decades to come was only a phone call away.
By the smile on your face.
Paul McCartney phoned me, and he said, I'm going to write a song. And it was the biggest hit. I swear to you, I think Paul writing Step Inside Love was really one of the major important things about the show, because that's what opened the show. Me inviting the viewers to come inside, come and join me, rather than me going into their living room.
This is Radio Caroline on 199, England's first commercial radio station. My name's Simon D, with you for the next 2 hours. First one off the top of the pile.
The search was now on for more presenters who could tap into the powerful new youth market. And the BBC turned to the risque world of pirate radio to pluck DJ Simon D from obscurity. D-Time went beyond the predictable chat show as the wild man of pirate radio was given license to do virtually anything and immediately wowed a watching public.
You want to ask me anything?
How did you start?
Funny you should ask me that. Bribe.
Bribe?
Yeah, I bribed the head of BBC Television.
I see.
I just want a few headlines tomorrow morning.
The first two shows, we had 2 million people watching this early evening show with this quite well-known disc jockey Simon D looning around. At the end of the third week, we were on 8 million. Suddenly, the BBC was saying, where are these people coming from? They're not supposed to be here, 8 million people at 6:30 in the evening. Well, I mean, what's the planning department doing? And at the end of the fourth week, we were up to sort of 16.
Hello, take me to your leader.
Hey, he's rather groovy. Now tell me...
It was a gamble to put an unknown in charge of the BBC's very first chat show. But within months, Dee became one of the most famous men in the country on a show that would be a template for future British TV chat shows.
He was very good looking, very kind of collegey boy, and just a great show that you wanted to get on. That was the show to get on and be interviewed by.
Well, I wanted to meet you too. You're very good looking, you know.
Oh, don't you start! Oh, God.
The kids loved him because he had that blonde hair and that baby face, and he had charisma. He did have the arrogance on the screen, that just as much arrogance on the screen. That little bit of arrogance that made you think, ooh, he knows what he's doing.
I thought he was one of the most powerful people on television, actually. I mean, he had a tremendous following. The adults liked him, the kids liked him, everybody liked him.
It's crisps go with so many things.
Do you crunch? You don't? Well, you should, you know. Get your crunch disc. Fast, because the crunch is happening.
Crunch and crunch when it comes to the...
As his fame spread, Dee began earning huge sums of money and enjoyed a TV superstardom that had never been witnessed before.
I went to some town in Wales to open a supermarket. There's thousands of people. And they had these horses going up and down the street, keeping the crowds back, just to cut a supermarket tape. And I thought, my God, here we are in deepest Wales, and this is the effect of our show. How extraordinary. The power of television, how extraordinary.
He bought the sports car, and he dressed very sharply. He knew how to act, though he were a star. Mark you, he knew how to act, though he were a star, even when he wasn't one.
Dee had become the first TV presenter to acquire pop star status, but his critics were circling, particularly about the amount of money he was earning.
I think it was the Sunday Dispatch. It had 12 pictures on the front page of people. Wilson was there, and Heath was there, I think, and various other sort of notoriety people. And I was there, you see. And the article ran, isn't it shocking that Simon D should earn more than a Prime Minister? And they came to me, what do you think of that? You see, I said, well, give him more. What do you expect me to take less? You're paying me, I'll dance on one leg for a grand a week if you want me to, but don't criticise me if I do.
Meanwhile, over on ITV, their biggest show, Sunday Night at the London Palladium, was well past its peak. Host Jimmy Tarbuck was chirpy enough, but the old variety show format was on its last legs. ITV Supremo Lou Grade was the master of the traditional variety show and was convinced he could buy his way out of trouble. In typically spectacular style, Grade unveiled the Tom Jones Show. It was to be the most expensive TV programme Britain had ever seen.
On the day that there was to be a press conference to announce the launch of the This Is Tom Jones series, I went to Lou Grade's office and said, you know, Lou, they're going to ask how much Tom is getting out of this. And he said, what do you think? And I said, let's say it's a £5 million deal. That will make headlines. He said, you say 5? I say 10. Well, wait a minute. He said, no, if you say 5, I say 20.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is Tom Jones.
In the Guinness Book of Records, it's the biggest sum ever awarded for a television show, £20 million to Tom Jones for This Is Tom Jones. And of course, it was just the figure that Lou Grade made up on the morning.
Utilising Lou Grade's legendary contacts and Tom Jones' pulling power, the show drew in the viewers with the biggest names in show business.
That word glamorous will come up time and time again. And Tom's shows were just wonderful. And not only was he there with this vast, wonderful orchestra, and there were these great guest stars coming in from abroad.
He thoroughly enjoyed it because he was able to choose all his favourite American acts, you know, Jerry Lee Lewis, Chuck Berry, I think Richard did it, all those people that Tom admired, Aretha Franklin, they all came to Britain.
With a roster of US stars, the show was actually made for both British and American television. But with the power of the dollar uppermost in their minds, the British audience sometimes suffered from a second-class performance.
In those early ATV days, we were the first ones to get colour cameras because Britain was all black and white. And so we used to shoot for America in one-line system, and we had one camera there with the real shot of, let's say, Tom Jones, and the other one here, where Tom Jones was looking down the colour and not looking at the black and white. So we used to get the show when everybody was looking like that, and the Americans would get the hello straight down the lens. So the Americans got the proper shot because that's where the money came from. I mean, the money was just coming in from America. And because it was cheaper to make shows in England than it was to make them in America. Simple as that.
If Lou Grade could get away with a transatlantic Tom Jones offering, his attempts to clone the show with other names failed miserably.
The Engelbert Humperdinck Show.
The Engelbert Humperdinck Show was designed with all the glitz and glamour of Hollywood, but never felt like a British TV production. The critics quickly moved in for the kill.
All the time you were working on shows that were made for here and America, and the comedian Dickie Henderson said a lot of them landed in the middle of the Atlantic with a dull splash because you were trying to accommodate two different audiences.
One of the dubious contributions that Lou Grade made to British television, along with many good contributions, was that he pioneered the transatlantic TV show, the one that was supposed to please the British audience and the American audience equally. And I've got a terrible feeling that he ended up displeasing the British audience and the American audience simultaneously.
Okay, go ahead.
Knock, knock.
Yes, who's there?
Engelbert.
Engelbert who?
How soon they forget. There was 18 of those shows. And right after the 18 shows, I didn't do any more because I think they canceled it.
In the Melody Maker Readers' Pop Poll for 1968, Simon D. as the top male TV artist of the year. He beat Tom Jones and Cliff Richard.
ITV had discovered to their cost that putting pop stars on telly was no guarantee of rating success. Over at the BBC, they were also discovering that creating TV celebrities with pop star aspirations had its drawbacks.
One of my nieces asked yesterday, why are you so fat? Which is, you know, 4 years old, and they suddenly say, why are you so fat?
Why are you so fat?
Because I eat too much.
The first thing to say about Simon D is he was very talented. He was very, very quick-witted on TV, much more quick-witted than most talk show presenters. His problem was that he wouldn't prepare and didn't care what happened on screen, and the executives did. And he got their backs up, and he got the backs up of the people working with him in the studio, which is a big mistake, because if they're not working with you, they'll work against you.
I wasn't hard to handle. I respected my producer and my director and my team. And anything they said, I went along with. Except sometimes when, you know, it is my show, or my name on the show. And sometimes I needed an edge just to let them know it was me out in the cold there.
Has anybody in the audience a question for Robert Morley? I feel the sort of person that you're all longing to ask him a question. I've got a whole thousand.
As his programme ran into its third series, the BBC bosses began to ask questions about Simon D's on-screen style.
Come on. Come on, now look. One.
I mean, you had to say to him, you know, when you've asked a question, now listen to the answer. You know, like so many people who do interview shows, you know, they are too worried about their questions to listen to the answers that they're getting.
Well, he was crap, wasn't he? He never listened, you see. The art of interviewing is listening. Simon D never used to listen.
Bollocks. Complete rubbish. First of all, if you have a show, it's your show. If it's live, it's even more your show, because you are the one that goofs if you goof, nobody else. The last thing I did was be non-attentive to my guests, and you find any one of them who will say that I gave them a bum deal. I think you'll have quite a tough job finding them.
He wasn't good. He was floundering, you know, and he was talking through his nose, and I didn't dig him at all. I haven't got a lot of time for, you know, anybody that's just made it just on here. I mean, he was a disc jockey.
What's that man doing? What? What's that?
Just looking. Just looking. Just looking. Carry on,
what were you
Marty.
saying anyway? And to you. I know what that means in sign language. It's obscene, actually. And I will not go back to your flat with you after that. I didn't even met you.
While critics questioned his talent, Dee's ratings remained high. But the BBC were more concerned with keeping control over their wayward star.
We went into the third year, and we started having little arguments about things, you know.
Drugs or grass was around, everyone was smoking that. I mean, millions have, millions are, millions will. Oh, none of us were supposed to admit it.
He did one or two irresponsible things, you know, and I got him in. I said, that's just not on. And he said, well, it's happened in my private life. I said, no, you ain't got a private life.
Bill Carton and I have never spoken about that. End of subject.
The mercurial nature that had made Simon Dee's career was about to be his undoing. The man brought in to reflect the swinging 60s was proving too hot to handle.
I would talk to him and say, Simon, you know, just listen, just do what other people tell you just for once in your life. And that would anger him enormously because his ego had grown out of all proportion. It was ego run wild.
At the end of the contract of 3 years, he came with his agent to me, and they said that he'd been offered £1,000 a show by London Weekend Television, and would I like to make a counter-offer? So I said yes, £200 a show. And his agent said to me, "No, hold on a minute. You're paying him $250 now. I mean, you're offering $200." I said, "Yes, I just want to be sure he wants to stay."
I wasn't expecting what happened. I was on what they call a roll, and I was flowing along, and then chop. So that was the shock, I think, more than anything else.
I'm quite obviously superfluous to requirements.
The end of the 60s marked the closing of the first chapter of British television. Sunday night at the London Palladium, the show that had launched ITV and topped the charts for over a decade was dramatically killed off. In an era of revolution, its old-fashioned variety format looked dead in the water.
It had got a little bit old-fashioned, very set and staid in its ways.
You'll be amused by
Palladium host Jimmy Tarbuck would quickly resurface on the BBC's new #1 show.
You see who that is, don't you? You see it? Yeah, excuse me. Excuse me.
Yes, mate?
It is you, isn't it? Starbuster Scarcer.
That's Ian Smith.
Of course it's Starbuster. He used to be on the Sunday night at Palladium, didn't he? All that codswallop every Sunday. See, he took over all for Bruce, didn't he?
Yes, that's right. Wasn't as good, though, was he?
No.
Sunday night at the London Palladium's demise marked the beginning of the end for Lou Grade. Now 60 years old, ITV's greatest impresario was about to face his biggest challenge. The government had announced that each ITV company would have to rebid for their franchises, and a new would-be mogul was emerging for Grade's lucrative London station. David Frost had been the catalyst for change in the early 60s on the BBC's satirical programmes, and as the decade went on, his power and influence grew.
What advice would you give to a new television company?
My advice to you is make me a partner and I'll help you.
He was a complete television animal, David. He was born to do television.
Just like Lou Grade, David Frost began to develop the attributes of a media mogul. Years before transatlantic flights became common, Frost was commuting to host a New York show once a week, and in his spare time, he discovered and signed up a whole new generation of the Showbiz Set.
The man in this case, my learned friend, Mr. Maltravers, appears for the defence, and I appear for the money. Good morning, Super.
Morning, wonderful.
Experienced comedians like Ronnie Corbett and Ronnie Barker were paired with Frost discoveries like John Cleese, but Frost was always impatient for more.
Now, after the first series of Frost Report was a big success, I said to people at the BBC, you know, you should give all these three guys their own series. Oh, no, they're very good at Second Bananas to You, but no, they're stars in their own right. And I said the same thing at Rediffusion, and they said, oh, no, they didn't want to do that. But in the end, I said, well, I would produce the three shows, and then, you know, the controller and everybody else could blame me rather than himself.
Forming his own production company, the new TV mogul began to showcase the performers who would later become the Goodies, Monty Python, and the Two Ronnies.
Now, let's see if we can remember our names for this evening, shall we? Staybaker.
Philippa, sir.
Philippa?
Yes.
That is a nice name.
Hawkins. Samantha, sir.
David Frost's showbiz pretenders were poised to take over, although many of them didn't realise they were destined to be the backbone of British comedy for years to come.
They're all terribly well educated, very bright and very sweet, very nice, but there was that feeling abroad then that they might not stay at it too long, you know. A little bit of a frippery they would go through, you know, having just graduated.
Good evening. Here is the news. President Tito arrived at London Airport earlier this evening on the first stage of his 5-day visit to the... Somebody's stolen the news.
Fighting against this new wave of talent in 1968, Lou Grade went head-to-head with David Frost in the ITV tender battle for the London region.
We had to detail the things we were going to do that were new, and therefore it implied that some of the things that were old were not so good. But we tried all the while, you know, not to personalise it in terms of other companies and so on, but talk about the new ideas. However, we were obviously saying we were going to do better than the people had in the past, and that meant that there was quite a stormy welcome for LWT when it actually started, because, OK, you say you're going to do better than we did, well, let's see.
Frost won the tender, and with his new consortium created London Weekend Television. Lou Grade was humiliated. Not only did LWT get his channel, but in the old Sunday night at the London Palladium slot, David Frost now showcased his own new stars.
Oh, we're not John and Yoko, and we're not Bill and Ben, and we're not Dave Dozy, Binky McIntitch, we're Moira and Ken.
It was a kind of studio version of the Sunday night at the Palladium, and David was doing not only Friday, Saturday and the Sunday, but also doing a weekly show in America.
He spread his net so wide because one night he'd be doing an interview type show, and then another night he'd be doing a virtually a variety show, like a reborn Palladium, where it was all jokes and sketches and star guests like Peter Sellers and Sammy Davis and whatever. But the night before, he'd probably been talking to the South African Prime Minister.
The new LWT lineup was dominated by David Frost himself, on Friday, on Saturday and on Sunday. But the audiences for the Frost shows rarely troubled the ratings charts, and Lou Grade made sure he had the last word in the rivalry.
Lou would ring up Cyril Bennett, our controller of programmes, and one of our Saturday night specials would be on. And Lou would ring up Cyril and say, Cyril, I can hear viewers switching off all over this country.
Although Frost's long-term career was assured, after 18 months his 3 times a week show was pulled from the schedules.
Simon D, production number 0422, take 1.
LWT's first big money signing would also prove a flop. Simon D was to be LWT's star attraction.
He really hoped that they could let Simon go loose and do anything he wanted and say anything he wanted. But it didn't work. He had no discipline whatsoever. And I thought, and I think most of the critics thought at the time, that he made a fool of himself.
Good evening. There's nobody here. That's all taped applause. Nobody here. See, that's all taped. A little button there. See? I can cue little small laughs. Listen. See?
I found myself not where I wanted to be, not with the guests I wanted, and in a general state of mental decay, really. Plus the fact that on BBC we'd had high audiences, but that wasn't the case on London Weekend Television. So I more or less died, really. That was the end of me.
Despite the big money deal, the Simon D show was pulled after only 6 months.
That old saying, success goes to your head. I think that maybe that's what happened with Simon.
I was persona non grata then. There's nothing wrong with me, I'm a perfectly normal guy. But if you place enough seeds of doubt in people's minds, gradually it grows until they say, him for him for him.
Well, I think he believed it, didn't he? You must never believe it. I've told you all along through this. It's fairyland. It ain't real.
No one before or since has fallen from the showbiz set quite like Simon D. Less than a year after being one of the biggest stars in television, his career was over for good.
He was on our TV screens every Saturday, and then suddenly he wasn't. You just thought he was going around the world.
For the man who had hung out with the Beatles, the 15 minutes of fame was up, the money was gone, and the realities of the world returned.
I went down to Fulham Road to the Labour Exchange, and I signed on, you see. And I had to get this grill. And the girl said, yes? I said, I gave my name. She said, what do you do? I said, I'm a disc jockey. Oh, you're Simon D. Oh, look how the mighty have fallen. I thought, yes, what a line, and how true. But she loved saying it, you know. Look how the mighty have fallen. I thought, yeah, you're quite right, darling. You're quite right. But wonderful. It was...
As ITV stumbled, the BBC were making preparations to go into battle in the 70s, the most competitive decade television had ever seen. As British television entered a golden age of entertainment, a new Premier League of stars would push themselves to the brink of health and sanity.
I would drink at least half a dozen stiff vodkas, just enough to feel no pain.
I found he was on amphetamines, which like speed, and I had this lunatic on my hands.
The worry and the concern and the energy that he gave to everything cost him his life in the end, really, you know.
Simon D would play no part in this golden age of television. Cold-shouldered by the industry, he disappeared from view altogether. Well, almost.
The last time I saw Simon, I was sitting as a magistrate in Richmond.
There was a potato peeler with Lancashire written on it. And I took this potato peeler out of the store. Oh, you had for sort of pinching potato peelers. And I went to court, and there was O'Cotton, who was a JP.
D was fined and would later spend time in jail for not paying further fines.
He walked down the court, and when he got to the door, he turned around and he went, "Bye, Bill." And my two co-magistrates said, "What a dreadful person." And I could only say, "Not really." I said, "At one time, he paid my wages."
We're part of the Showbiz Set for the very last time next Tuesday, 9 p.m. 9 p.m. tomorrow night, and it's brand new Faking It. From ex-naval officer to drag queen, the show is back in style. White Teeth is coming up next tonight, living proof that best-selling books can become the best of TV drama. It's 1992, and Millat is taken centre stage.